Okay. All right then. So, okay. Welcome everyone properly. So hopefully not too much setup. It kind of defeats the purpose of a minimalist sort of approach to meditation, which was what I was aiming for today. In terms of where, I always like to give a little bit of a, if not a rationale for how, why or how you might use a particular practice in the course of your life. And of course, as always, excuse me for those of you who say, usefulness in my life, what are you talking about? I want enlightenment. To which I say, mwah, Godspeed to you, or Buddhist speed, I guess. I'm not there yet. So many of my, much of my own practice, in all seriousness, is related in some way to providing relaxation, providing concentration, providing insight into my life and what's happening in it. Sorry, I'm just admitting someone, oh, it's Adriana. Hey, Adriana, welcome. And above all else, self-kindness and kindness toward others in the community. But in terms of the stuff that I'm sharing with all of you week in, week out, because I was going through the archive, the backlog, and there's no discernible pattern, which I kind of love for what it's worth, because this isn't a course, like this is a sangha, you might say, like a community of people, right? So we don't have to follow a curriculum or anything, we just kind of do our thing, and that's in fact exactly what we've done. So I don't know, it's something that I wanted to at least throw out there as something for all of you, not right in this instant, not as we practice today, but maybe something for, I'm throwing it to the group to think about whether you would like collectively me to maybe build in a bit more structure over, like, we could do this starting in March, say, or really any time, where maybe I do a series of physical practices that are all directed toward a particular thing. And the same thing with meditation in some ways, it makes even more sense. Like we could do a concentration series, we could do a meta series, there are so many ways we could go with it. And one of those ways is exactly as we have been doing, which is with no discernible pattern, and really you somewhat at the whims of whatever the vagaries of my own practice have been, because that's kind of what's happening. Okay, so does that sound right? Does that make sense? Cool, because I can't stress enough, like, my mind is strange and wonderful, but it's mine. I'm happy to share it, but I think that anytime we're practicing or we're learning or we're connecting in community, it's going to be that much richer and stronger if we're getting input from everyone. So maybe what I'll do, just to make that particular ask or suggestion, to put some sort of meat on the bones, I guess, is I will put out an email to the whole list and just indicate, maybe I'll set up some sort of Google form or something that's very, very straightforward that people can, sorry, I see a hand up, Sue, that people can contribute to. Sue, go ahead. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Right. Wow. Mm-hmm. Ha. Right. Oh my. Okay. So, right. I totally recognize it. And honestly, I cannot. I shouldn't preface with honestly, it makes it sound like everything else has been dishonest. Sorry, that came out of a real wanting to thank you for that share. And I'm also recognizing that because I'm taping this for the archive, like for people that are viewing after the fact, they're going to have gotten now about 90 seconds of dead air. And so here, I'm just going to backfill it so that they understand what the question or not question, what the share was. And I guess all I would say is before doing so is just to tip my hat to the what a wonderful share and question that was, Sue, and I will absolutely do my best to speak to it. So my apologies though if I in setting this up for everyone else, again restating it, if I step on your intention at all, okay? But the question was, or the comment was, is it possible, or well, actually, it wasn't that. It was a possible. Sue was sharing her experience of having, over the course of regular silent practice, having experienced a pause. What did you call it specifically, Sue? It wasn't or was it that? It was like you'd find the pause. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That kind of mystical, yeah. So yeah, like the idea of a pause, or like the edge of a pause where everything just comes to complete stillness, thoughts, like if I'm, so you would ask part of your description of that state, which the formal name that I understand that state is something called secession. Like CESS, on and on. Cessation is the idea that you would have it could be truly a moment, like a breath, or it could be, as you say, 10 or 15 minutes, where your own sort of sense of self, like of a subject object. So like normally when we practice, there's a feeling of being you, and then there's a feeling of like you observing whatever it is, your breath or whatever it is that you're observing. And in moments of cessation, or that pause that you're describing, it is as if it's very similar to a flow state. And so the other description you had of like dipping, being in a canoe and dipping your hand in the water and feeling that kind of like feeling of bliss, of like that you've hit a special kind of way of being. That to me sounds, I mean, it could be a lot of different things, and I don't know that we have to label it, but it sounds like secession to me. What I would say about that is I have experienced that. I was meditating for a couple of years at least, and really intently hoping to accomplish that for what it's worth, which is a bit counterproductive in retrospect. Like, I think there were points where I kind of, rather than, I'm not surprised that you would say that you had that experience in a moment of kind of like repose, like with a hand in the water out of the canoe, because I think the tighter we grip when we're sitting, like whether we try to hold on or that we're chasing a particular experience, the less likely it is to actually happen. As it happens, I can remember very vividly the first time I experienced that particular way of being, and it was super cool and exciting and not disorienting, but it kind of like there was a moment of like, whoa. It was after the end of a very, as it happened, I had just taken a class at my yoga class my partner was teaching, and it was a very vigorous class. Like I kind of left it all on the mat, and when everyone else was in corpse pose, I'd come up into a seated meditative posture, very much like I am now, and then that was it. And I was there for as long as we were there, 3 or 4 minutes, and then when she began talking again, I kind of snapped back into reality. So, yep, it's a thing, and it's wonderful, and it can feel really nice, and it's kind of trippy. I guess what I would say is, the one thing is that in terms of you raising that particularly, Sue, is that if that is a rewarding practice, like if you achieving that state or putting yourself into a practice habit where that is a place that you might be able to, exist from time to time, I think that's wonderful. And I don't think that there are any rules about any of this stuff anyway. That being said, I stopped chasing that particular experience. Like, I haven't actually meditated in a way consistently where I've attempted to recreate secession or that pause. It still happens occasionally, but I've kind of let that go. And the thinking behind it, if you're wondering, like, why would you, like, that sounds wonderful, why would you not, kind of really zone in on that? First off, there are plenty of people who do, and that's completely valid, right? That's my understanding of it. For me, I basically took heed of more experienced teachers who said that there's the potential to kind of get waylaid in the practice, in a meditation practice, to, in essence, kind of like go down what seems like a really right turn, but a wrong turn, in the sense that you get all about getting kind of, like I said, grippy, but like, desiring the recreation of the state, as opposed to just like being however you're going to be. So yeah, now these days I treat that, if and when that happens, I treat it as kind of like it's like the cherry on the sundae, but I'm not building my whole dessert around it. How's that? How's that for a mixed metaphor? And someone's got a sweet tooth. Does that make sense? Awesome. But awesome for you. That's a really cool thing to experience. And for other people that are out there that might be like, damn, I'd really like that too. I mean, one, you can meditate, right? You can do that, and we could talk and practice with that. But I guess the other thing is, if you can find any sort of deeply immersive practice, like it could truly, some people say it's gardening, other people it's like riding their bike or running or swimming. Like, there's lots of different ways. I have a friend that talks about finding it when they were tree planting. So there isn't a one size fits all, but if it's any activity that you can kind of lose your own sense of self, and you are existing as the activity, honestly, like from a I'm gonna get real fancy here, from a non-dualistic Buddhist perspective, or in Hindu approaches to these questions, it's Vedanta. I'm goofing. I already know saying it, that I've goofed the pronunciation, but there is a discipline that is very much related to the idea of dissolving your sense of self. So, bonus. There you go. Wow, I was not expecting that. That was like a graduate level meditation question. I hope I acquitted myself. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. 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 Right on. Cool. Well, hey, this is what a great in, because as it happens, so here's our play, or here's our sit today. It is to sit in silence. I think I called it the long silent. Now, long silent could be like a day or 10 days or something. For us today, it's going to be 20 minutes. And I'm saying silence, which is kind of amusing, given that I live in a house with 2 dogs and another human being, all of whom are going to make noise. So if you are in a situation where you can meditate, we're meditating on a sound here, okay? 'Cause the sound of silence. And obviously, I hope it goes without saying at this point, but I'm going to say again, as always, this is just a suggestion. So if you're like, no way, man, I'm meditating on my breath, or I'm meditating on whatever, that's cool. You be you. You do your thing, right? But you might want to try this. It's kind of a neat thing. And the strategy here is, if you find yourself in a place where you are immersed in noise, the cue that has helped me to find silence in chaos is to listen for the sound directly behind my own head. Okay? Like what I mean is, like, unless you have some creeper that's literally like come up behind you and has placed their head on your shoulder, there's not much going on back here. So, and there's a bit of, being intentional or kind of make-believe in the sense that if there's a whole bunch of noise here in the foreground, to be able to direct your attention back here. But, I don't think it's fake it till you make it. I think it's more like being intentional about where you're going to place your attention, okay? So I'm going to say nothing for 20 minutes, which for me, anyone who knows it, they know that takes some doing. The first minute will be our on-ramp, meaning find your meditative object. If that's silence, cool. If it's not, not. On the fives, at the 5-minute mark, I am going to give you chimes, okay? And I'm just a little test run here. Can you just confirm, someone out there, that you can hear this when I do it? Perfect. Okay, cool. Side note, we could have a very interesting conversation about cultural appropriation, because these ain't from my culture, but I thought about what would be maybe more in keeping with the culture I was raised in, and all I could come up with was air horn and starter's pistol, neither of which seemed conducive to meditation on silence. So, there you go. So what I'm going to do is, rather than say anything, just as a way of reorienting or catching yourself, maybe waking back up to that moment, or maybe if you slipped into a state of that pause, of that cessation, a way of kind of like giving you a guidepost to reorient onto. So on the fives, I'll give you a chime, 20 minutes and we're done. Okay, so first minute here, let's begin. Just organizing our body. And so this first minute is the one where you get to move, where you get to adjust, where you're definitely encouraged to be deliberate about how you're going to organize your attention for the next 20 minutes. And eyes can be open, eyes can be closed. And you can play with this, it works in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, having eyes open maybe takes you out of that audio channel. On the other hand, if you're feeling overwhelmed by sound in your environment, opening the eyes just to kind of dim the switch and then tune back in behind your head. Okay? And just allowing yourself to get silent, to be silent, to stop. while the last little bit of sound comes out of the chimes, let's consider this a bonus minute. That's 20. But just take one final moment here. Just collecting yourself, not needing to rush off into whatever's next or analyze the process or anything. Just recommit to it, or send some gratitude to yourself for showing up, or a thought to someone special. Okay. If the eyes are closed, maybe letting them come back in. And similarly, letting some movement come back into your body. So, wondering how people found that. That truly was 20 minutes of silence, save for the chimes, which had an interesting kind of effect too, because there's like a blast of sound and then a slow release. We're concentrating there, right? Which can feel, similar to, or right in track with what Sue had raised at the outset. It can feel remarkably relaxing. It can also not. Certainly for me, that it was the last quadrant of the sit where I felt silence, and it was, for what it's worth, not that my immediate surroundings were any more silent. The vent right by me here was still making noise. There was some noise downstairs. I could hear the kind of like little bit of tinnitus in my own ears. So there was plenty of sound, but for whatever reason, I quieted through the meditation, if that makes sense, or at least that was the feeling, as opposed to anything else changing. I got a little bit quieter, or my experience of the sounds got quieter. So I'm just wondering, how did that land with people? Not my comment, your experience. Mm-hmm. Huh. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Well, that totally makes sense. And so, like, it's something that, just because, without getting into all the specifics, I mean, I guess, so I'm restating it for for the recording. I think it is completely, again, there are no wrong ways of experiencing. Your experience is your experience, right? Fundamentally. But it is not surprising to me that you would find a practice of sitting in silence to be one where emotions or thoughts would come up, because it's almost like, if we think of the lack of sound or lack of stimulation as creating a sort of a sensory vacuum, right? Then something else can rush in there, anger in your case, or other feelings. So I think that's completely normal. And then the reality is there. So I think you can decide what you do with that. Like, maybe that's the kind of thing that you decide to sit a little bit more frequently in that style, as a way of not agitating yourself, but investigating, what's happening there. Maybe you say, like, actually, I don't need to know that right now, so I'm not going to sit in that way. Yeah. So for what it's worth, about these being kind of jarring too, that's a bit of a catch-22 from a teaching perspective, in the sense that some people would want constant guidance and some people would want complete silence and not even the gong. And so I was trying to find that happy medium, but your experience, for what it's worth also, I should say, in terms of like the various meditative objects that you can have, I actually find sound consistently the most challenging for me. I find the feels and, oh, thank you, buddy, and the you know, visual meditation, or there's so many other ways of meditating that sound can feel quite, not triggering, but I suppose it feels a lot less consensual to me. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Like, when jackhammer's going off, yeah, that's it. I'll leave it there. Deb, what were you gonna say? Well, and I shanked it too, right? I missed. Sorry, what? Oh, there you go. Uh-huh. Right. Right. The timbre isn't quite so high. Right. Yeah. You know, totally. Actually, you know what? For what it's worth, I have been, because like I say, I have been meditating with sound in my own practice. That's where this in part came from. Is that this is where I've been recently. What I have been doing, and it's partially a hack to like fool my body to think that, and my mind to think that winter isn't actually happening. So I've been putting on this YouTube video just on TV and letting it sit in the background, and it's a campfire by a lake, and all it is the sounds of crickets and the snapping of the logs that are as they burn. I'll send you the link. There are a bunch of them. It's 4 hours of it, and so I sometimes I look at the fire, sometimes I don't. Like recently, I've just been meditating on the sound, and there's something about it. I mean, this is as you say, it's a very, you know, striking thing, and there is something about more naturalistic sounds, I think. So that's another way to kind of move with this a little bit. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And anyone else out there? Any questions or any comments? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting? Hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. And cast adrift. Yeah, that's fair. I think it's really interesting though that your experience and mine are almost like mirrors of each other. Like I feel like I'm almost agitated often in the first 5 or 10 minutes of a sit. Like you know, for the longest time, you know, I have to kind of, until I get to about 17, 18 minutes in, my body and stuff doesn't just settle. It's not cessation, obviously, but it's just like a kind of a general dropping down, calming down, chilling out. But hey, I think, you know, you may have just really arrived in that space, and then as it went on, it gets a bit more challenging to maintain. So yeah, it's interesting, right? Hmm. Yeah. You know, the one other thing I should say, well, and I hear you about thoughts coming in, because in fact, the question that, or the share slash question that Sue had dropped in before we began, that's like meat and potatoes for me. I was like, my brain was just like, woohoo! Like, let's dig into this. And so the idea of letting that go and then meditating on what's happening right here, that was the challenge. I kind of did, but I let that be and came back to what we were actually working with. That being said, now that we're done, I did want to add one little thing. I didn't want to give the impression either to you, Sue, personally, or to anyone that's with us today or is watching this subsequently, that was making light of the idea of enlightenment. Like, I do think that that's a thing. And I do think that there are definitely aspects of this practice that can be mystical or existential, or, a whole bunch of really kind of, some pretty deep shit. I guess that's the way I would put it. Profound, and I think it's really an amazing thing. It's not like this is just about meditation, but there are these moments where we can connect to something bigger than ourselves. Like for some people, that's religion. For other people, it's maybe a non-religious spirituality. For some people, it's a connection to nature, and others, it's a connection to other beings, like either people or, for me, a dog, that kind of thing. But I guess what I was really attempting to do was more say that for me personally, I don't think that there are very many human beings who actually accomplish, forget about cessation, but to live in a state of true enlightenment. I have absolutely met people where what the Buddhists would say, you have seen an incarnation of the Buddha in that person. I totally get that. And I do grant that there are, I listen to a teacher like Jack Kornfield or Joseph Goldstein. I'm thinking about people I've heard, or Sharon Salzberg. There's just a tenor and a tone to the way they carry. I don't even mean in a meditation, just in their lives, a softness and a wisdom that clearly these are people who have touched, the third rail of human existence, if you will. And so I don't want to give the false impression that there isn't bigger things there. I was just saying that I think that in the meditation world in general, that people would be better served to clean up their own situation first, in the sense of being good to themselves, being good to other people, and then if you kiss a little bit of enlightenment down the line, bravo. But hey, that's a long-winded explanation, but I felt like it was, given where we started, important to say. Any other final thoughts? My goodness, we had for a meditation on silence, there was a fair bit of deep thinking. Anything? Mm-hmm. 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 Very good. Right on. Uh-huh. Mm. Mm-hmm. 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 I think that's cool. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally, yeah. For what it's worth, I think that uh, you could think about an unguided versus a guided meditation, and then there are literally dozens and dozens of different styles of meditation, and I just think of them as being different tools in that particular toolkit, and over time we begin to see the ones that, for whatever reason, resonate with us more than others. And also that change, it's kind of like yoga poses. I always get a bit of a chuckle when people talk about in yoga it's called nemesis poses, which are the poses where your body just is not having it. You just genuinely are not enjoying that pose. And I have to say, in my experience, I've had 2 or 3 different nemesis poses over the years, and they've ultimately, through practice, and in part because they were so challenging, have become really treasured aspects of my asana practice. There are physical shapes now that I was 5 years ago I would, oh gosh, that does not work for me, and yet now it's this really sweet space to be. So ain't life a damn thing, eh? It's, you know, it's hard to have a handle on what makes it work the way it does, but that's another reason to practice and to be curious, right? So fair. Well, and the one thing I would say then is if you find your, this is like the emergency escape hatch. You're in an unguided meditation and you feel like you need guidance. Here's something, so truly, this is something that any of us could break out. Be your own guide. And what I mean by that is the simple, in this sit that we just did, is that whether it was a thought or it was a sound in your environment or, you know, it was the fan in the living room, whatever it was, the label that you could, or the note, the kind of mental note that you make to yourself is just to say sound or hearing. And then when you're not hearing anything, again, if you see, for some people, it would take them out of the silence to internally say, you know, silence or resting or whatever your note would happen to be. But in terms of what you're raising, like if you feel like you really need something to like hang your practice on, then I think that even just saying that to yourself, it's a gentle note, like now I'm hearing, now I'm not. And over the course of 20 minutes, it becomes a kind of like hearing, not hearing, you know? So some just to play. Well, there it is. So, all right. Well, are there any requests? I should actually say, I'm just gonna stop the video. So be well out there, everyone, if you're watching this recording after the fact. Excuse me for a second here, peeps.